think it
Cheers.
should be going now. But I suppose just to start off with, oh yeah, it started now. Can we just kick off with a brief description of yourself and the Brighton Energy Co-op, I suppose, as a whole?
Yeah, so I co-founded it nearly 13 years ago. And that was after having worked for 15 years in project and program management in the IT and telecom sector. So I sort of developed my professional project management skills, but I wanted to apply my commercial project management technical knowledge, I suppose, to environmental issues, and decided to do a master's for a year in sustainability and renewable energy. And then I was trying to find a job, and it was quite difficult to find a job in 2009, 2010 because of the financial crisis, etc. And changing career was a bit more difficult. So I ended up starting up a new organization because I wanted to work in renewable energy. And 13 years later, still doing it.
Is that how the co-op kind of came together then?
Yeah, and we were in probably the first 10 in the UK in terms of community energy organisations, and we knew that the feed-in tariff was being launched for solar and for other technologies at the time, and there were a few doing it, but it wasn't a well-trodden path, and we realised that you had to follow a certain legal entity to raise shares, but it was a sort of journey of discovery rather than going, this is what you should do if you want to do community energy. Okay. And since then we've raised about 4.1 million, got about 42 sites, it's about 4 megawatts of solar PV, and done lots of other projects alongside, including an ERDF grant program that we're coming to completion soon, where we'll have given out about £800,000 worth of grants to businesses.
Great. So what do you think is kind of the best example of a recently developed solar project?
The most recent one we just did was I don't exactly remember the figures, but I think it's about 580 kilowatts on it's a vineyard in Sussex, very near the sea, Rathfinny Vineyard, and they use a lot of electricity. We're also going to export quite a lot of electricity, but it's perfectly sited, very large warehouse roofs with on-site usage. And our experience, now there's no government subsidies for solar, is the ideal location for the business case, be it any sort of funder, be it community or not, is an organization, often a factory. Manufacturing is very good, is using a lot of electricity, their bills have gone up a lot, they both financial and green drivers is why they want to put PV on the roof, and sort of industrial type roof, an easy install, and that becomes quite cost efficient. So those sort of business sites we mix those with public sector. So we've done lots of schools, we've done university buildings, college buildings, but businesses as well, because often they can make decisions much more quickly. You deal with the owner, they get it or they don't get it, and you can move more quickly.
So I suppose for that kind of specific project, or either just that or in general, how do you typically come together as an organisation to determine kind of key objectives for a solar PV project and what you want to deliver?
Well, I suppose our core aim is decarbonisation, is to roll out as much community-owned PV as we can. But each project, and it's important that each project stands alone financially. So we have a financial model, sort of a profit and loss for each project, to make sure that with all the costs involved and the likely income stream, and the income is primarily from selling electricity on site, sometimes export, that it will be profit making from year one. So that's including paying back capital to investors and paying interest to investors or members. So that if you imagine a financial model, the bottom line, when you get to literally the bottom line, is in the black. It's not in the red. And you can't predict every scenario, and the weather does play an influence. But so our whole, I suppose, business model is built on each project being profit making, and when they all add up together, the organisation as a whole, we're a not for profit, but you still have to make a surplus, because otherwise, effectively, you're making a loss. and then that surplus can be used to reinvest in new projects, maintenance, or community benefits to the wider community, which we support a lot of educational projects in Brighton.
Yeah, and how does the cooperative model kind of, I suppose, feed into those specific objectives for community-owned energy projects?
Well, it's about, I suppose it's about ownership and benefit. So we operate primarily, really, as a business. We are, Brighton Energy Limited is our sort of legal entity. So we have to make a financial profit, but the way we view it is that the pie that's if you imagine there's a pie chart of output at the end is split between environmental, social, and financial output. And so being a cooperative, or a community benefit society, we have to benefit the community overall, but also our funding comes from the community. So we have 750 members, most of whom live around Sussex or Brighton and have invested about £5,000 each, sort of an average. It does vary. So it's both the money raised comes from the community, and then I guess the output of our activities benefits the community, be it cheaper electricity for the sites where we've got PV, or where we make surplus, we can provide grants or support for other organisations.
Right. And how do you typically, I suppose, decide on specific solar projects to deliver against those objectives that you set out to achieve?
Well, part of it is finding sites that are willing to go ahead. So we do have, you imagine the classic funnel where you have many possible sites, and it sort of narrows down to, maybe 4 or 5 installations per year. So it's a sort of standard marketing exercise of we might identify business park roofs from Google Maps, or from going and doing a talk to trade associations, and distill down potential target sites for putting PV. It could be community centres, could be schools, could be businesses, and then engage with the decision makers. So sometimes it's literally knocking on the door, other times it's through social media, other times it's cold calling. So it's very typical sort of business development pipeline. And then when we find organisations that are interested in our offer, which is effectively leasing their roofs for 25 years and offering them discounted electricity, or discounted green electricity, then we go through a process of assessment of the suitability, the structural survey, etc., getting connection permission from the grid, from the DNO, the district network operator, and then getting to the point of signing a lease. And then once we've signed the lease, we'll commission. Well, generally that's the point we'll start raising money, because we don't want to raise money when a project's not sure. So there's a lot of chicken and egg stuff going on. Sometimes you have to move forward with one bit, unsure whether the next bit's going to work out. So, but it's I think from that sort of perspective, we operate quite commercially in terms of, our competitors would be other organisations funding solar PV. So we have to operate in that sort of sphere.
Yeah. And in terms of building consensus, I suppose there's 2 elements to it. Internally, how do you build consensus? And then how do you find the process of achieving consensus within the communities that you're going into?
Yeah, so, I mean, we're only 2 executive directors, 4 non-executive directors, and then another 5 staff or managers. So we're a small organisation. We have weekly team meetings, probably monthly, actually, board meetings. So there's different stages of decision making, but there's not many of us within the core of Brighton Energy Co-op to reach a consensus. And generally, we don't put decisions about sites out to our membership. I think we would put sort of more existential questions out to our membership. I mean, when we have an AGM, we discuss what we've been doing through the year, what our plans are, etc., and take input, but we don't really consult membership on day-to-day operation issues. And in terms of this different communities, so most of our sites, from sort of a practical perspective, are within about an hour's drive of Brighton, because fundamentally, if you can own an asset for 25 years and you're going to have to visit there once every 6 months or more often, you don't want it to be a long way away. But we have done local community engagement, talked to people, gone to parish councils, that sort of thing, where there might be concern about the aesthetics of a solar array, or indeed we were running another project which was installing electric vehicle charge points, and to see where they might want charge points. So yeah, so in the instance of either perceiving or needing to engage the local community where we're going to work, then we'll absolutely do that.
Great. And I suppose leading on from that, how do you approach planning and project management around the kind of specific projects?
Do you mean planning as in planning applications, or just planning a project in general?
Projects, yeah.
Yeah, well, as I said, my background was sort of project management in the IT sector, so we know all the activities that need to happen, and we don't do anything particularly sophisticated. Maybe, you know, checklists and Excel spreadsheets and timelines, you know, Gantt charts if we're being quite complicated. Most of the work we outsource, so we outsource the installations, we outsource our administration and accounting, our electrical checks and maintenance. So quite often we'll have a project plan of getting it to the stage of raising the money, and then we have a more detailed project plan, which is the solar installer that we subcontract to. So yeah, it's pretty standard stuff, really. Not, as I said, not necessarily using the latest platform technology or anything, you know, like Asana or Basecamp or anything like that. You know, Excel can still do the job.
Yeah, and I suppose how does the cooperative model, I suppose, either benefit that or just feed into that process?
I don't think it makes a difference, really. You know, it's mobilizing people to do stuff, whether that's in an IT company, in a council, or in, you know, cooperative business or not. Yeah, I don't think so. So we're not like a workers' co-op where every employee has an equal input. I think we operate more, and we do know an organisation like that, Infinity Foods in Brighton, where we've got solar PV, and literally everybody who works there has an equal vote. So it's democratic but slow, and yeah, we don't operate like that.
Okay. So do you think the overall visions that you set out to achieve have kind of stood the test of time, or have you had to revise those plans over the last however many years?
Yeah, it would be interesting to go back and look. I mean, they're sort of hard coded in our objectives. So as a community benefit society, we have 3 objects, and yeah, we're still doing them, really. It was about decarbonisation, challenges of climate change. Something that we did have in there was peak oil, which was a concern 13 years ago, that we might reach a point where there wasn't enough oil around. That doesn't seem to be, you know, a present risk, but using the oil is actually the risk. So yeah, we've kept our model quite simple in terms of we've just continued with solar PV. We've had a project where we used EV charge points linked to PV, but we're probably not going to be doing much more with charge points immediately. So yeah, we have a sort of simple vision of as raising as much money as we can and installing as much PV as we can, and then using the benefits to, you know, benefit the community, particularly through environmental education.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that your kind of initial goal was just to set up a business kind of for yourself to work in this area. But how did you go about identifying a funding need?
So, sorry, my phone's falling out. We've had a number of different stages of fundraising, probably maybe 10 share offers we've done. And the first stage was to take us from, you know, an idea where 3 of us, who were the original directors, were doing this unpaid, which was probably like the first 18 months or so, but we needed some seed funding for external costs, and we raised money through a pioneer share offer, which a community benefit society can do. So it's like the earliest stage of a share offer, where the members' investment is most at risk, really, because, you know, you're an early business. But in some ways, because we'd taken investment from those members and said, well, we're going to do our utmost to, you know, deliver solar projects, it's what kept us going. I think if we'd just, you know, done it voluntarily and we hadn't taken it, certainly that was my motivation, taking other people's money and promise that we were going to pull it off. There were lots of points, particularly when the government was changing the feed-in tariff, when we might have just thrown in the towel and gone, oh, let's do something else. But because we, you know, I felt because we were spending other people's money, we had to continue and deliver projects and be able to pay interest and pay their money back. So yeah, in some ways that was a motivating factor. So yeah, and we've benefited from grants, but the vast majority of the funding we've had is from community shares. Okay,
and how did you kind of deal with that process of bidding for funding when you have, I suppose, benefited from grants?
So yeah, the largest that we bid for and was successful was the Next Generation Fund, where there were, I think, 1,100,000 pound grants for testing out new business models for community energy. And it was, it was well publicised. It was quite a complicated stages to go through in terms of a comprehensive application form, then an interview stage, and I think we possibly were awarded the grant after the interview stage. So it was done very professionally, but actually it was well structured to support the community benefit organizer, or to support the community energy sector with our interests in need. For example, money was paid up front for a quarter or for 6 month period, rather than you had to spend it and then claim it back, because as a tiny organization you might not have the cash flow to spend the money up front. So yeah, I think I see it as rungs of a ladder, where it's a bit like a career, where you're successful at a small scale thing and then you go, okay, well, I can roll that up to the next one and then to the next one and the next one, and then that's how you build your reputation and track record of just learning from each success, and you probably learn more from some of the failures as well.
Yeah, and did you kind of have to write applications yourself, and if so, how was that process? Because I know that can be kind of a tricky area for some either companies or organizations.
Yeah, I'm quite used to doing that, to be honest. I suppose actually talking about grants, the bigger one that we've benefited from was a ERDF funding, which is even more complicated, and we're still living and breathing the complication because it runs until September. And that's going to be, well, it's about 1.2 million that Brighton Energy would be either a couple of 100,000 expenditure for us and about 900,000 grants that we would give out to SMEs. And we probably will achieve about £700,000 worth of grants, because it was all delayed by about a year because of COVID. So yeah, it's I don't know if grant applications get much more complicated than European funding. It took me about 2 years to get through all the hurdles, so yeah. I think that's probably as hard as it gets.
I suppose then, speaking of expertise, over the course of delivering projects, how have you handled either kind of seeking out specialist expertise or approaching experts?
I think we're generalists in this field, in that running a small organization, you have to be able to do HR one day and marketing the next day, and then technical, and then legal, or whatever. So we know enough in each area. But yeah, particularly something like legal advice, we bring in a lawyer if necessary. We've used a health and safety consultant to improve our processes in the past. We outsource to an accountancy firm for to effectively sign off our finances. So yeah, I think knowing where your limits are in terms of how much you can do as a generalist, because a lot of stuff you can do, like marketing, etc. It's you can't get marketing too wrong. However, you can get technical stuff wrong if you wire electrics wrong, and finance you need to get right, etc. So some things you can do, and others you need to know where to outsource.
Yeah, and how did you go about, I suppose, finding where to go for that advice?
So there's a really useful resource in terms of Community Energy England. So the membership organisation for community energy has a Lumio group. So it's like an online forum where every day people are posting questions and suggestions and ideas. So often that's the go-to place to say, does anybody know a lawyer that can do this? Or so there's that for the community energy sector. I mean, there's also like Solar UK, I think it's called now. So for the solar industry, there are resources as well, but also you know, if you want an accountant, you might do it locally, so sort of local networks, chambers of commerce. So it's both, I suppose, horizontal, so local stuff, and then vertical might be national.
Okay. And over the course of all the projects that you've delivered, what have been the biggest difficulties that you've experienced?
I think a very big difficulty is actually getting the host site to a decision and sticking with that decision. We've had a lot of changing of minds, flip-flopping, you know, deciding to do it themselves, etc. So there's, you know, that's a sort of classic business development process. And then in the early days, the government changing the feed-in tariff, you know, with 6 weeks, 6 weeks notice, they were, I think it's like 2012 and 2015, and did it a few times. There were cliff edges, and you can see if you looked at the rollout of solar over the last 10 years, there's periods where there's massive spikes, and then there's periods where there's very little, because rather than a consistent glide path, you could call it, in terms of support going down over time, there were lots of cliff edges. So that was difficult to deal with. But, you know, we learned and adjusted. Things that were seen as very risky, once you've done them a few times, you know, you kind of normalized how to manage them.
Yeah.
But we do, where there's trickier problems, we do refer to our board. So kind of share the decision making and share, I guess, assessing the risks, and therefore it's very experienced retired people who've worked in different sectors, and, you know, their combined knowledge is really useful to have. It's like effectively like having a group of mentors that we can refer to.
So that's typically how you'd approach kind of overcoming issues.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we'll discuss internally and think about ways to approach whatever the challenges might be. But if we don't have an answer ourselves, you know, seek advice from others that might have gone down that route.
Yeah, and I suppose on the flip side of that, then, what have been the biggest learnings from the delivery of all your projects?
Yeah, good question. Certainly, what causes us problem downstream is the quality of the installations, and that can come from very simple things like cables not being zip tied. I was on a roof earlier this morning where there's lots of connectors where the cables connecting the solar panels together sits in water, and if that happens, inevitably water gets in and it causes electrical issues, and then, you know, it can end up burning out the inverter, etc., etc. So the quality of installation is a key thing, and we only learn a lot of that retrospectively. Yeah, and actually, you know, solar is seen as what's the term, like plug and play, that you can install it and you don't have to think about it very much. But actually, you know, there are a lot of maintenance issues that arise, so it does require certainly continually monitoring through remote monitoring software, but quite a lot of physical interventions going to fix things, change things, replace things. Anybody trying to?
Sorry, Damian, I lost you there for a second.
Oh, I was going to say, certainly anybody who is looking into the sort of community solar projects, put plenty of budget aside for maintenance, because inevitably quite a lot needed to be done. And it's something that's also materialized over time is legal issues that come about with you know, developing the leases. Yeah, quite often we've not used a lawyer for negotiating leases because they're quite standard, but things materialize over time, and you know, I think retrospectively setting aside budget for using a solicitor for conveyancing might well be worth it, because yeah, though my time is a lot cheaper, I don't always get it right. So yeah, knowing when to outsource, I think, is a good lesson.
Okay, and what, I suppose, either decisions or elements of your organization do you think have been the most important in project delivery?
Appetite for risk. I say that from the perspective of, if you really don't want to run in risk, the best thing is do nothing. You know, inevitably, Yeah, and so it's generally about sort of risk minimization. There's always going to be risk, particularly with the technology that's involving electricity, etc. So both financial, technical, operational. That's so I think that links to decision making, always being able to make decisions, because there might not be the right decision, and sometimes you have to go backwards. But risk management, decision making, yeah, moving quite fast as well. I think we're forever trying to seize new opportunities and look to see how we can grow, what new innovations we can adopt. So yeah, I've been quite entrepreneurial, I guess.
Yeah, I know you mentioned those forums before too, but what have been the most important sources of advice or guidance for you?
Yeah, fellow community energy organisations in the sector. I think we've now got to the stage that we're giving more than receiving, if you know what I mean. That we've been doing this long enough that most scenarios we've come across, and we're providing advice to others more than seeking advice. But there's always new things to learn, and that makes life more interesting when you're learning new things and new challenges to deal with. If it was just repeating the same thing for years, then that would be a bit mundane. So yeah, always been willing to reach out and share with others. But I guess because the community energy sector is geographically located, like organisations are supporting their own local communities, there isn't much competition between us. Okay. So we're willing to share ideas and solutions, etc., that might not exist in a sort of purely commercial area.
Okay. I suppose then, just to wrap up, what guidance would you give to any communities looking to develop community-owned energy projects?
Well, it's a very difficult time, because not just because the government subsidies have disappeared, but because now base rates are what, 4.25% at the moment in the UK. The majority of fundraising we've done, base rates were 0.25%. So there's 4% erosion of the benefit that we can offer. So we've been offering 5% interest. Well, if base rate's 4.25%, suddenly there's not much attraction from a financial perspective to what we can offer. So it is a very difficult time in terms of raising money. We're looking to offer a bond instead of community shares, because that's a shorter time frame, and that we can offer a higher interest rate, and that will perhaps get us through the perhaps it's the next year or so where base rates are the highest. Also, it's difficult for community energy organisations because of electricity prices being really high. Organisations are looking at our offer and going, well, if we invested ourselves, the payback period would be 3 or 4 years. It's the most attractive in terms of the return on investment for organisations to do solar PV themselves as it's ever been. So there's the challenge for us as an established organisation is the money is a lot more expensive, so it's difficult to raise money. But potential sites don't want to do projects because they go, it's attractive for us to do it. So being a startup community energy organisation, it's I guess you really have to consider, are you willing to run a business, and how many years are you willing to run a business, and are the startup funds available? It's no different from running any other business. But it's particularly challenging at this stage because of both, I suppose it's a supply and demand side constraints to do with inflation. Yeah. And I guess one point of advice would be look to it makes more sense to me to have county-wide community energy organisations, or sort of on a regional level where there's only one set of accounts to be done. There's only it's one commercial entity, but you could have lots of ambassadors in local communities who are finding projects and helping raise money, and perhaps being paid a fee for doing that or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't need every small village or town to have a new a business that they're running, a community energy business. And a model to look at actually that's doing this is the Big Solar Co-op, who are working on that model where there's one sort of core community energy organisation, but they've got kind of national level ambassadors. So yeah, that's kind of my view, that it doesn't make sense to replicate a lot of administration and, you know, board meetings, etc. For lots of tiny organisations. It makes sense to have economies of scale.
Yeah, are there any kind of key lessons that you'd want to share with anyone else? I suppose at key points that you learn along your process.
Yeah, I mean, don't believe anybody until, you know, the lease is signed in terms of their willingness to work with you, because things can change. Fundamentally, it's about running a, you know, finances always have to work. Cash flow is the key thing in terms of raising money and having enough income to pay your obligations. And yeah, running a community energy organisation on a commercial basis, but with financial, environmental, and social, you know, outcomes, so triple bottom line. Yeah, probably the core things. And yeah, make sure you're willing to do it for the long run, because, you know, our projects last 25 years. It's not necessarily personally we're going to be involved for 25 years, but it takes a while to get up and running and to get to a point where you might even be able to pay the bills and certainly pay salaries. So yeah.
Great. I think that's everything I wanted to cover today, unless there's any other, I suppose, reflections on project development that have emerged to you.
No, don't think so. I think I've covered
Great.
everything.
I'll stop the recording quickly then.
Cool.